But I'm doing it in like half the time I used to.
And the weather is starting to be. Do you guys have?
Fantastic.
I look for it.
Thank you.
It is. So why don't we start?
Swing that thing back your way.
So why don't we start with a little few minutes of shamatha to get things rolling.
Until full enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the practice of generosity, patience, and the other perfections, may I awake for the sake of all beings. Until full enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the practice of generosity, patience, and the other perfections, may I awake for the sake of all beings. Until full enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the practice of generosity, patience, and the other perfections, may I awake for the sake of all beings.
Hello, everyone. Our last class.
So our carrying practice for this past week was hold the view that actions of mind are as potent as actions of body and speech. So I played around with this one this week and became keenly aware how often there is automatic judgmental commentary floating through my mind. So I really attended to my thoughts. And I certainly hope that I did not harm the people I was thinking about, especially the people who were driving in front of me. But it did really make me aware of just kind of how often that pops up without any intention on my part. And I definitely felt encouraged to cut it off when I saw it and not just kind of roll along with it. I'm wondering if other people played around with this and if you had interesting experiences. And we do have a mic here if you wouldn't mind using it so the folks listening at home can hear the audio.
As you, Sally, I also was aware of the conversation more than normal. And I, from my way of thinking, I don't know where I acquired it, but I have the belief that the thought has power, because when I have a bad thought, I always say, cancel clear, for it not to go any further than my head. Then I was aware that sometimes I think of things that I consider serious. When I am walking, I thinking about my philosophy of life, and sometimes some other things goes across and I deviate, but that is my behavior, trying to control if I have a thought that is not in accordance to my ethics, to cancel clear.
Pass it down. Well, this exercise, holding the view, was different, I thought, than the previous ones. And I didn't know immediately how to put it into effect, and so I'll just share. Part of that was I realized this phrase, the view, that Buddhism uses, and you have used in the title of your course, the unbounded view. This is a new word for me, and so, I mean, of course it's a familiar word, but the context makes me have to grope for what it must mean in the things that I've read recently, and so I translated it as some kind of perspective, but when I look at the sentence, which I did quite a bit this week, I think, oh, it's got 3 words in it, maybe it's one of those triple Buddhist things that crop up. Then when I read the sentence, it seems like it's a recommendation to hold a view that would be the opposite of what people normally would do. And when you look at that, it would mean that we see body and speech as more potent than mind, as a mind is maybe not as real or not as potent. And I thought, when did that happen? When did we make body more real or more potent? So I associated body and speech as the forces of the relative world, and mind is more of the dharmic world, or more of whatever the opposite would be in the local vernacular. And then the way I worked with that, having finally decided that's what it was about, it was a balancing so that the mind had primacy, I translated potent and substituted causal or causative. And in doing that, it meant to me that the mind is just as causative of karma as body and speech. In other words, because it's mental doesn't mean it's a pale act that doesn't really count somewhere. In fact, it may count even more so. And so the final place I left with it might be unusual too, is that I thought of that statement of Christ where he says that committing an adultery in your heart is as, I don't know the wording, but the idea being that it's equally wrong. It matters equally as doing the act in reality. And I thought that's really the spiritual primacy is on the mind. So I had to more or less think about it. I can't think how you would put that into effect other than just trying to remain mindful. So it was good. It was complicated.
Yeah.
When Sally and I came up with this, that's kind of the causative framework that you used was really what we were, I think, thinking of, in the sense that we imagine that, like if we punch somebody in the nose, that causes them harm. It's pretty obvious. But if we think something bad about them and they can't hear us, we don't say it out loud, we don't punch them in the nose, that somehow there's no effect. And we thought it would be interesting to play with the perspective that it has the equal effect of punching someone in the nose, say, so that it alerts us to what's going on in our minds. Is that about right? So I think that's really in concert with the way we were thinking about it.
Yeah, and also the piece that Sylvia mentioned, it's about setting the habit of our ethics. And if you have a negative thought about somebody in that moment, you may not be able to see immediate consequence, but I think we've all had the experience where we've nurtured some kind of negative opinion about someone else and then found it very genuinely affecting the way we speak to them, the way we act toward them, the way we speak about them when they're not there. It all connects. It all connects. And the tradition really does encourage us to think about actions of body, speech, and mind, that they all plant seeds. They all lead to results.
I like this practice partly because of how difficult it is. It's relatively easy to learn not to punch somebody in the nose. It's not so easy, but somewhat possible to learn not to swear at somebody. But it's very difficult to learn not to even think something negative about the person who has, in that moment, surprised you with some offense of one sort or another. That's a completely different level of practice. And that's what is so fun about it, in a way. It's challenging. It's good.
Yeah, it does ask us to stretch a little bit.
Yeah, I'll just mostly echo some of the things that have already been said. But by actually practicing this last week, I noticed how much I don't really have, I guess, what I would think of as right thought. That I wasn't aware how often I am not doing that. I've always understood the aspiration to practice right thought along with right speech and right action, and that actually makes a lot of sense for some of the reasons you were just saying. But I also thought of that biblical teaching about the depending on the translation, to have lust in the heart is as bad as having committed the lustful act or something, and that one really troubles me, and it's probably on the side of things like why I left biblical religion, because it seems there's something about
you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't.
Yeah, and like the thought police, sort of like we're supposed to, like God is a thought policeman, and so in Buddhism it's almost like I'm going to try to maybe be my own thought policeman over my own self, and I'm this is, like you just said, Cynthia, like this is a radical one, this is, like you guys were saying, this is a big one, and I'm not here yet to be able to do it, but I observed how I'm not there, and how I spend a lot of time in my mind, I think, kind of just entrenched in judgment. I mean, there's a lot of time where I think, man, that person is so stupid, so stupid, and so, everything they do is not everything, but so much of what they do is destructive, and what a shame, and I just have a lot of that kind of judgment, and with that comes a little bit of, I kind of want justice, I kind of want justice, and a lot of my thinking is, yeah, boy, they're getting away with some stuff that they shouldn't, and there should be justice, and so I spend a lot of time thinking that. So I observe that, and part of me thinks, well, we have to do that. We have to be able to have, brave, courageous judgment, and seek justice, and not be pushovers or something in the world. And so this is one for me to keep working with for quite a while. It's a tough one. But having said all that, like I think in general, like when I step back and just think of that basic Dharmic teaching of trying to practice right thought just as much, like that makes sense to me. So kind of measuring the two against each other is where I'm at.
Yeah, I think it's really important not, having seen that, not to then just turn it into a reason to punish yourself or criticize yourself, or this whole idea of the thought police feels very menacing to me. It is what it is. It's where we are. It's the habit that we have. It's the habit we've nurtured. We've really trained our minds to do that. And when we notice that and begin to think, well, actually, it would be better for me and better for others and better for the world if I cultivated a different habit, like every bit of effort that goes in that direction is a benefit. And a lot of people live a whole life and never think twice about that thing.
So taking this job has kind of forced me into this practice.
So we should say Linda Grove, our ED, is speaking now. So.
Because I would watch because some people I'm so, it's easy to get along with, and minds travel on the same lines and that kind of thing. But then I started running into people that I noticed my bucking away and my resistance, and watching the words and listening to the words come out of my mouth and the intonation that I had, like, I can't keep doing this because it's not helping this relationship. So I really took this practice on in earnest, and watching myself when I would be around that person before I would speak, try to get in that place of stillness and non-judgmental and really listen to the person. And it has not been easy, but if I didn't have this practice, people wouldn't like me very much, I think. So yeah, this has just kind of been my steadfast thing through this whole last year. Yeah.
I had a really very social week last week. I was in Bellingham to do a press thing, and I spent 3 days seeing people, and then that continued when I got back in town. And I often spend a lot of time alone, so I don't interact with people as much as somebody who goes out to a job. So I really had a chance to see what was going on with this. And it was interesting. I think of myself as generally liking people and having a favorable impression of people. When I see people in a room, I don't think actively like, I have some negative thoughts towards anybody. But when I applied this practice, I would see how instantaneously a judgment would spring into my mind about somebody, and everybody, like random, just random people that I had never seen before. I was basing it on their age, their sex, the clothes they were wearing, like totally random stuff. And it was, I had the idea it would be nice, if I had positive thoughts, and I wasn't even really sure what kind of positive thoughts would look like to communicate to people. But I was pretty sure that it wouldn't be that instant judgment, which was really sort of shocking. I was not aware of how instant and firm it is. Often if I interacted with the person, it would immediately drop away, because they would say something and it would just kind of shatter whatever I'd thought. But it was amazing how quick it was. And I guess it's possible at a high level, like somebody with, like the Dalai Lama or His Holiness Karmapa, something like that. I think people have had experiences with folks like that. Mother Teresa, whom I did get to meet, and I can confirm she has this effect on people, where I think they have worked with their own mind stream so long that there's something just instantly positive about being around them, and you can just kind of feel it. So I do think that there's a positive way in which that can affect other people. I actually do think that the mental aspect is probably a little bit more direct than we think. But to Joe's point, the other side of this is on the thought police comment, the karma, the suffering when I watch this happens to the thinker, right? So I see a person and I have an instant negative thought. They were largely negative too. That was another thing that I was really surprised. I would see all these people have largely judgmental negative thoughts. So I was the one filling my own mind with this negativity, and it kind of, when you're in a bad mood and you see people, which I wasn't in a bad mood, but I've seen this happen before. Everybody seems, everything seems negative, and the more negativity you feed into your mind, the more it kind of develops. So we become our first victim of our own judgment, and I think that's, rather than thinking of it in terms of a moral kind of component, it's really just we constantly victimize ourselves by filling our minds with that negativity. I remember getting in a conversation with somebody a long time ago who said, we were talking about a murderer who got away with it, and how that would tend to disprove if you thought there was a moral God who should punish that person or something. And I was thinking, if you kill somebody, you may not go to jail, but you never get away with that. You have to live with that for your whole life. And there's karma there, and it really is violent to the doer. So what happens in our mind doesn't go without effect. And this last week for me was a real lesson in how much I kind of poison my own mind. So this was maybe the most, it was one we hadn't done before. So those are always nice when you work with something new. You can find new potency, but it was really enlightening for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one thing I did notice when I would do this practice is how it did affect me. And just feeling the tenseness in my body relax. And it's just like an automatic opening to listening. And then also taking it a step further, like we're told that what we see is a mirror of ourselves. So, like, what's the negativity coming up? What can I learn about myself? Because it's a reflection somehow. I don't know how that works, but it was a good tool for me. Yeah, lots of learning. Yeah.
I think part of what's especially challenging for me with this one is that it's one of those rare times that I have to honestly say I don't really agree with it. You know, like I remember like that. I remember my teenage self like grappling with that Christian teaching that, you know, lust in the mind was equally as potent as lust in action, and thinking about that and just thinking, well, I got this, like, you know, teenage lust for my married algebra teacher and I can't help it. And it's not the same as acting on that lust. And I believe that. I do. I believe it's not the same. I could have it happen. It comes up. I could try to not think about it, you know, but stuff just, I do believe it's different. And so, like, if I have the compulsion where I really want to, you know, I think very badly about someone, you know, and I just want to give them a piece of my mind and hope that, you know, a house falls on them and all this stuff. And then I don't give them a piece of my mind, and I don't cause a house to fall on them. Like, even though I thought those things, I don't think really that they're as potent, really. I mean, I agree with what you said, Jeff, about how, you know, when somebody actually kind of can master this, they radiate, you know, some amazingly high level of like peace of mind and, you know, compassion and all of that. And that's not me. But I do think that I have to say that for me, it's almost more like it's like aspirational, and I think it's like it's acknowledging that there is potency of thought, that does matter. Mm-hmm. But like I've fantasized about, you know, robbing banks, you know, in my life, and you know, it's not the same as actually going and robbing the bank. I just don't think it is, you know. I probably shouldn't fantasize about robbing banks, but you know, and so I probably don't do that as much as I did when I was, you know, much younger. But I think it's to acknowledge that there is potency, but I do think also that there's also value. I guess what I'm trying to say conversely is there's value, because some people fantasize about robbing banks and then they go rob banks, and then some people like myself fantasize about robbing banks and then don't go rob a bank. And there is a difference. I think there is a difference in somehow the overall experience of that relationship between thought, speech, and action. That's the part I'm kind of grappling with, at least for the purpose of discussion.
I think we should acknowledge that the theology of the Christian commandment, or whatever that is that we've been talking about, the lust in your mind point, is really different than the concept of the karmic consequences of mind. And we shouldn't conflate those two things too much. They're not really the same thing. Which is not to comment too much on what you just said, Joe, in terms of which one is, you know, the robbing of the bank versus the thinking about the robbing of the bank. I'm not qualified to talk about that, but having studied both these religions pretty extensively, the theology that they come from is really different. And so there's a really big moral component in the Christian context, and it's pointing to that. And the moral code in Christianity is just different than it is in Buddhism. So if we have a lot of, if we come from a religion that has a very strong emotional content, and both Sally and I grew up in the church and Joe grew up in the Catholic Church, and I know that's a common thing. We use words like deity and, you know, concepts that look the same in Buddhism, and they can sometimes muddy the waters more than clarify. So just as far as that teaching goes, I don't think that this, Sally and I weren't meaning to talk about a moral component about the way the mind works. And if you'd never heard that teaching, it would have made this clearer. I kind of wish none of us had ever heard that in a certain sense.
As the person who innocently raised the parallel, I would say
Yeah.
part of my thinking on it doesn't come as much from that, the theological root that you're talking about, but thinking about, say, lust in the heart having an effect in a person's psychological economy, being as pernicious to them, quite apart from what it would be to the victims of society, the robbed bank, but that a person that carries this craving or carries this emotion in their heart, it probably karmically, or probably in terms of the evolution of their awareness, their awakening, it doesn't matter as much if they're acting it out, if they're obsessed with it. And where I found the fruitful benefit, and what I'm learning about Buddhism now, is this idea of these 5 poisons, and thinking of anger, because last year I was very angry at my neighbors for making noise, and I spoke with them about it, and it worked out in a mature way, happily. But this year, when the noise recurred, and we're talking about children playing in an adolescent zeal,
Right.
I didn't allow the anger to develop in me, because I had this teaching that it's a poison that needs to be mastered, and so that's why I think I could begin to see the internal negativity. The idea of that anger could be mastered, and anger is really just like one of these negative mental constructions. I mean, it's the emotional source for it. So if you actually don't allow yourself that inwardly, and then of course won't allow yourself to express it. I mean, you could do it inadvertently, but if you become so that you don't allow yourself to get agitated listening to the noise, then you suddenly realize it's just noise, and that you were adding a lot of theater to it, and then you aren't even upset by it, and because you haven't allowed yourself that avenue of getting yourself worked up in anger. So I think that's more of what I was thinking. Having it in your heart is just about equivalent to pounding on the glass. Or for me, that was really helpful, learning about the poisons and the fact that there's antidotes to them.
Right. Well, I think these discussions are great, so I'm glad you raised it, and I'm glad Joe riffed on it, and I think we all think about this stuff, so. Yeah. It's good stuff. Well, should we, I don't want to step on conversation. If anybody has anything else to say before we move to the reading, I give you a moment. So we have, yeah.
One of the things that intrigues me about Buddhism is the way, from a beginner's perspective, it can often seem as if we're told 2 contradictory things. And I feel like that's a little bit true here, in that we are encouraged to view our thoughts as powerful. They have a powerful effect on our mind stream. They are our mind stream. What is there besides mind stream? You know, that, whoops, you know, you've just slipped down this negative stream. And I also feel like I've heard teachings that say when it actually comes to karma, you know, if you're just sitting there meditating and thoughts arise and pass, even if they're murderous thoughts, they don't accrue the same karma that going out and killing somebody would accrue. So is that accurate? Does that sound true, that we can hold both these views at the same time? That thoughts are both powerful, and if they are released without turning into action and speech, then they are released and they are not harmful agents.
I'm going to take this one.
That's a really good question.
Yeah. Yeah, the second piece of what you mentioned feels to me like instruction I've also heard about in meditation, essentially allowing karma to ripen. You know, that there's experience that arises and it's going to persist for a certain amount of time. And then if we don't feed it, if we don't either grasp onto it or try to push it away, that it will exhaust itself and it'll be done. And it's just done. And so I think there's a difference between a mental experience arising and the thing that we do when we're thinking about it and we're nurturing it and we're feeding it and we're turning the wheel. We're basically planting, we're re-energizing it. We're kind of replanting that seed and embedding that more deeply in our mind stream. But yeah, from early in our meditation instruction, I feel like we have heard that idea that if we can simply rest with experience without manipulating, that then it's just experience. You know, you were sort of pointing at the difference. So there's the experience of hearing the noise, and then there's all the internal commentary like, this is no good, I really don't like this, I need to go talk to the neighbor. Those are two different things. And one is experience and one is the suffering that you're making out of it. And that in meditation, we learn over time to see that there's actually a little space. They're not the same thing. It may feel like they arise together simultaneously, but actually they're not identical. And as we build our awareness, we can have a greater and greater sense of the difference between this is happening and now I'm doing something with it. And that space is the space of choice. It's the space of freedom. Like, I don't have to be driven by this in this moment. I can choose. Do I just hear it as sound and let it go and not wound myself with it? Or does it generate this whole ugly business in our mind?
Yeah.
Is that helpful?
I think that's exactly right. We heard Michael talk about this pretty early on, and I remember it being it really struck me. He mentioned that we can't help but be afflicted by karma. So when anger arises, we don't have any control over that. But if we have our meditation, there's a space right after the anger, which is a space of freedom. And through meditative practices, we can learn to develop the ability to see that space and have a chance to do something when it comes up. And then, if the guy cuts you off and you feel the anger rise and you see it, you can let the anger go and just let the driver go. But if you think, that, and you smash on the gas and start screaming at him, then you're planting new seeds of karma. That's how Michael described it. Yeah. And he said the freedom that you have is in that moment of action, in between the karma ripening, the anger arising, and the action you take.
Yeah.
So in this instance, I think when I would just see people and have this instant judgment, that's the karma ripening. and just like, I would just look around. It was like a video game, judgment, ping, ping, ping. Images would pop up and judgments would co-arise with them. And because of the practice, it was really easy not to feed that. And I've seen myself do that. I've seen myself sitting and looking at somebody I don't know, never seen before, and create a whole narrative about that person. And that's me actively feeding that.
Yeah.
Usually not in a positive way.
So I can't remember what you said the other side, the contradictory message was.
It's not so much contradictory, it's just this idea that we've been playing with here of actions. What is our phrase? Hold the view that actions of mind are as potent as actions of body and speech.
Right.
So that's the opposite in one sense, in the sense that, the arising of a thought in the mind during meditation,
Right.
you're just saying if you can release it, it does not lead to negative karmic consequences.
Yeah, the arising is not an action. When it arises, you have not yet done anything.
Oh, so in your phrase here, hold the view that actions of mind are as potent as actions of body and speech, you're not including that initial arising of...
Yeah, I hadn't really thought of it that way, but it's sort of like I have eyes and I see, like I have experience. And I can have that experience without there being any commentary about it, without there being any judgment or likes or dislikes or making demands about the paint colors or any of the rest of it. So we have mental experience, which is not the same thing, I think, as actions of mind.
So now I have to spend another week on this.
We're going to have to ask this question to one of the teachers to clarify,
Yeah,
to make sure we're exactly right.
We're
but
in the right spot there. Yeah.
This has been my understanding too.
Yeah.
It's almost like taking action. Like if we stick the word taking in it, taking action.
Yeah.
Kind of helps distinguish it.
You stub your toe, you feel pain and anger, which comes immediately. And if you don't do anything, you're not feeding it. But if you knock the table over in an angry fit, then you've taken taken action. That's actually physical action. But.
Yeah.
Good? That was really good. I'm glad you asked that question.
Yeah. Yeah, let's move to the reading.
Do you need readings? Do you have one?
Thank you.
So some of you may be familiar with this, and some of you may not, and that's okay, either way. It's an old classic, which we have periodically recited here in the center. And instead of me reading it this time, since it is a text that we do, why don't we go ahead and say it together? And while we say it, just kind of notice, let's read it a little bit more slowly. Let's not bang through it really fast. And just kind of see how you relate to the words as they come up. They're pretty simple and immediately understandable, so doesn't require a lot of stopping and thinking about it. And then after we read this, we can talk about how we related to it, and then I'll say a few words after that. So this is the 8 Aspirations of a Great Being for anybody who streams this. It was written by Kabje Kala Rinpoche, which is the last Kala Rinpoche. And I think this text comes from Luminous Mind, the book. So let's read this together. By the power of the truth and goodness of the supreme refuges, and by the virtuous actions and a pure motivation, may I, with all my heart, exert myself in removing the myriad sufferings of beings filling space. By the excellence of virtuous activities of this world and beyond,
May I, according to the needs of each, satisfy the hopes and aspirations of all beings.
May my body, flesh, and blood, everything I am made of, contribute in the most appropriate way to the welfare of all sentient beings. May the sufferings of all beings, my previous mothers, dissolve in me, and may they have my joys and virtues. However long this world lasts, may I never have, even for a single instant, a malevolent thought toward another. May I always strive with energy for the welfare of beings, without relaxing my efforts in times of sadness, exhaustion, or other obstacles. For those who are hungry or thirsty, for the poor and needy, may I naturally lavish upon them the abundance they wish for. May I bear the heavy load of the terrible sufferings of beings of the hells and other realms, and may they all be free. This is one of those aspiration prayers that's full of extraordinarily high, lofty aspirations. The one about never having a malevolent thought toward another is particularly on point given our recent discussion. We can see how challenging that is. We've just had a week of experience. But we don't need to all talk about this, but I was just wondering, does this feel inspiring, daunting? How are you guys, when you see this, what is, how do you relate to that?
I think I've always found it inspiring, not in the sense of, oh yeah, I'm going to go out and be like this, but more the idea that there are people in the world who can actually to think such thoughts and to live that way. That's totally inspiring.
Yeah.
And there's one line in particular that has always resonated with me when it says, without relaxing my efforts in times of sadness, exhaustion, or other obstacles. Because of course, that's exactly what I do. I relax, I'm sad, I've encountered an obstacle, I'm exhausted. I give up, I relax my efforts. So that is one idea that I just hold like a very precious jewel, and think of at times when I'm exhausted.
Yeah. Does that sort of express others' view?
Or having just recently started on the path, Michael, does this seem insane? You made a face.
Didn't mean to make a face. But the expressions of taking on the suffering of those in hell, take it on for them. I mean, clearly you have to go right back to the title of this. This is an aspiration of a great being. And perhaps Kalo Rinpoche achieved it, or perhaps he was holding or conjuring something even beyond that, beyond what he could achieve. As he's defining what a great being would feel. But when I read something like this and try to understand it, I can either say, well, Buddhism is really given over to extreme statements, but religions tend to be. So I think I have to think, well, then there's something different and unique in Buddhism that would make this a normative statement, which would be it isn't how we would normally be, just out of our ordinary willpower, trying to just be a good person and then take on hell for someone else, I would guess he's really saying, in a state of spiritual realization, then this would be the aspirations. I can't imagine just a normal person could take on these aspirations. It would give you a tremendous moral inferiority complex. But I mean, if there were something preceding it, I mean, if there's something like, I don't know how to, I know how to distinguish between enlightenment and realization, but something that, an awakening, there has to be something beyond just normal moral Western goodwill to reach these heights. That's all I'm saying. It's not insane, it's just extraordinary. Or what is it? A great being.
Well, I'd like to hear Sally and Jeff talk about this, because I feel like I've heard Lama Michael say many times that it's important that our aspirations be outrageously big, that that's actually important. And can you talk about why?
Did he say why? That you remember?
Well, I can't remember exactly, but I think, you know, if you make just a small aspiration, what's the most you'll ever accomplish? Something kind of small.
There's a reason why we concluded with this one for our last reading. And I hope that this kind of acts as a way of tying together several of the themes we've talked about in this class. When you look at it from the perspective of where you are now, it can be, so, and it's called an aspiration. It seems very aspirational, like it is the highest measure. If a being could do this, you figure you got it made. You have the capacity to act on this as part of your path. And so when you think about it personally through your own kind of perspective, it feels like, I like to know that maybe somebody can do this, or that, you know, this defines the way somebody else behaves, and that's really inspiring to me. But we've talked about this concept of the ultimate. Our very first class, we talked about the nature of mind, and how the nature of mind is unconfused. There's an unconfused nature of mind that we have, and our experience is colored heavily by our confusions, that karmic stuff that rises up. But underneath that, that's the dirt on the gem. But underneath that is the gem, the Buddha nature, which is completely clear. And this prayer can be read in two ways. So it can be read as an aspiration from the relative side, from our side. But it can also be read as a description of what ultimate mind, what ordinary mind does automatically. From the perspective of our innate Buddha nature, if we could access our innate Buddha nature, this would be accomplished immediately. We could just accomplish that. For people who are enlightened, which is to say unconfused, this would describe their activity. So I personally find it very heartening when I read these to think the capacity to do this is in me and all beings. And this is it's hard for me to relate to it individually because I tend to relate to things through my confusion. But this is the kind of stuff that we all have that capacity, that inner kind of clarity that would allow us to do this. So this is in the path, when we talk about the unbounded view and leavening your practice with the unbounded view, it's like building a bridge to the fruit. It's building a bridge to that enlightenment that we all have inside ourselves. It's kind of hard to imagine that you would ever polish the rock off, the stone off, if you didn't believe that that stone was right there. You wouldn't really work at it. I mean, it would just be like, well, it's a nice thing. But if you believe that it's there, if you believe that your own mind is actually clear and unconfused, if you believe you have the spark of enlightenment within, then it means this is possible. And this becomes a description of something we all have the capacity for. And whether you're talking about the refuge bodhicitta and dedication prayer, or so many of the aspiration prayers we do, almost everything we do has this dual nature. It has within it the sense from the relative side, how we can relate to it from our confused side, but it also has hints of what the ultimate looks like, what, from the perspective of the ultimate view. And that ultimate view is always so weird and kind of difficult to access. But if you can see it in there and think, we have this capacity in ourselves, it can actually be really an inspiring kind of approach. So I hope that you can have a chance to think through this at some point, work with it in your practice, say it out loud, and imagine what it would be like to accomplish this, and begin to develop a little bit of confidence that you have the capacity, that we all have the capacity. One of the greatest barriers we have as practitioners is we're always trying to tamp down our ego. We don't want to get too proud of ourselves, and so much of our suffering comes from cherishing the self. But that can also undercut confidence in the path, and it can make it seem like I believe in enlightenment, but not for me. We need to have some confidence that we have that clarity too, and it's egoless. And these are the kind of prayers. There's nothing in here that you can attach your ego to. Like if you go through it, it's just all other beings. I'm really trying to benefit other beings. And so it's hard to imagine wanting to accomplish this and simultaneously feeding the ego. So it's kind of a safe way to practice with that kind of hope and that confidence in the path. The Dharma has been very cleverly put together to try to both help us undercut our focus on the self, but also have some confidence in the path. Would you like to add anything to that?
No, I don't think so. That's really how I've come to relate to it too.
I've always really liked it also, and I don't have a problem really with the ultimate aspirations. I remember Michael talking about that too, and it does make a lot of sense. And I think your reflection on how we don't want to have our aspirations be too small because that limits us, that makes a lot of sense. It seems like when I read this, it doesn't seem impossible. I don't see myself doing all this every day, but it does seem like I could imagine some folks doing this and being enlightened. But one thing that comes up is that, we talk, sometimes Michael talks about it, and sometimes we talk about how for brief moments in time, we can kind of have glimpses of enlightened experience. And there are, once in a while, I can pull some of this stuff off a little bit. Once in a while, I can try to really be in a good, centered, compassionate place and not probably have a whole lot of malevolent thoughts, maybe for 5 minutes or an hour or something. And then, giving to poor and needy folk, everything I can. I can pull some of that off maybe for an hour or two. And it is encouraging that if I think, well, I can do some of this sometimes, and actually I can almost even, I can remember having a little bit of this going on with myself here and there, that it proves in a sense that it's possible. It proves that, therefore, we are all enlightened beings trying to wake up or in the process of waking up, and it's very authentic. To me, I have a lot of appreciation for it.
I'm not quite sure how to say this. For me, when I read this and like the aspirations for Mahamudra, it's like, oh my God, this has been around for so long, and there's so many people that this is their ultimate goal. Like, it inspires me, my devotion to know that there's that this is out there in the world, and there's so many people that really look to this as the ideal. Mm-hmm. That's what inspires me. This has been around a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One other thing that occurs to me is the failure to accomplish this. Joe, as you were saying, if you can pull it off for an hour, one of these things, that's pretty good. But, even if you pull it off for an hour, you're going to fail. Some people do relate to these aspirations that kind of as a negative because they have the experience of, I can't accomplish it, so what's the point? Once that hour ends up and you have a malevolent thought, then, aspiration's done. And that's not how they're supposed to work. They're not vows. You're not taking the vow to do these things. So the moment that you fail and do have a malevolent thought, you can just continue in the next moment, start the aspiration again. They're designed to be a support, not a barrier to doing what they suggest.
Yeah. Yeah, and I have really come to equate prayers like this to some teachings that I've heard from Michael on the Chenrezig practice. If you've probably heard him say, if you've come to some of those first Sundays, that it's important at a certain point to develop what's referred to as pride of the yidam, which is exactly this sort of confidence that, in fact, the image that we're visualizing is our own Buddha nature, that is our true nature, our true self, that we're sort of looking in the mirror and seeing who we really are in that moment, and to stand in that place periodically. Some of our practices allow us to step into the place of the ultimate, the experience of the ultimate, and we are meant to nurture not egotism, but a real sense of confidence, like this is in me. This is me, which I find that really powerful. I find that really helpful.
We can break for tea, but we can just look for these two lenses. You can almost, it's like focal, rack focus. Like you look at the person who's close up, and then you look at the person back. They stay. One is in focus, the other one goes in focus, like that. Look for those in the prayers that we recite, and see those two kind of balanced views, because they're present in nearly everything we do here. There's a way to look at it from both ends. And now we can have tea. Then we'll come back and finish up.